people were scared of graffiti. They didn't want graffiti writers in their shop. They didn't want graffiti products. They didn't want people to come in and steal shit from them, because that was the expectation.
Yeah.
I'm going to carry this stuff. It's graffiti. Kids are going to come in. They're going to steal all my stuff, and I don't want that. And so that was kind of the vibe. So I also, again, wanted to be just like neutral and DL, and I would say to people, what about this says graffiti? Sometimes a retailer would say that to me, like, oh, this is a graffiti thing. I'm like, what about this says graffiti to you? And they'd be like, oh, you're right, nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, the only one who's calling it a graffiti product is you. And it was still a hard sell for them. It was only until certain stores accepted certain brands of spray paint and saw it as a growth area that it essentially exploded.
Did you want it to be, when you started it, did you want it to be associated with graffiti? Because of course that's your roots, and of course that's what it was primarily being used for at the start. And, you know, with the whole downtown scene in Iraq and the silver branding that was, and the drippy style and very unique aspect to it, it's going to be associated with graffiti pretty much no matter what you try and do. But is that when you started it as a brand, not just like making markers at your crib by the bathroom with the fan, but like you're like, okay, I'm going to do this thing now. I'm going to try to be legit with it. Did you want it to be a graffiti product? Did you want it to have that association? Or was it something you were like really trying to be not just neutral in terms of branding, but neutral in terms of what KRINK actually is? Because I noticed that I think you're going to have to correct me on the wording, but it's like we make essentially just products for artists. It's some wording around there, but it's products for artists rather than like, yo, graffiti, mop, chrome, and black.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you know, I would never turn my back on my graffiti history or graffiti. I'm 100% a supporter of graffiti and graffiti writers and graffiti culture. And everything about graffiti. I mean, I come from a graffiti background that's like, you know, cutting holes in fences and shoplifting and, you know, illegal activity versus like other aspects of graffiti. But I'm all for that. And to this day, and I'm also for, and I love this shit, to be honest. Like, I like it when the kids are like figuring out their own thing and doing their own thing and whatever, hopping a fence or, you know, finding new spots or doing whatever they're doing. Like right now, rappelling is like all the rage. It's amazing. I mean, it's incredible. I love it. Am I following every little aspect of it? No. But when I see it, I'm more of a graffiti guy that's like, more like what I see in front of me, like versus like the internet or reading about it or something. It's more like, oh, this guy like wrote on my door. Like that's what I see. Or I'm driving and somebody hits a spot. I that's what I see. So anyway, I love all that. And when I started the brand, I wasn't really starting a brand. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no plan. I had no idea about branding. I went into a meeting one time with somebody and they were like, oh, where are we going to put the branding? And I was like, what do you mean branding? And they were like, yeah, you're not serious. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, like, you know, I had to play it off but I didn't understand any of that. I was just learning. So I didn't have like a plan, a brand vision, and it was just one day at a time. Like I was way more like I said, like it should look neutral, it should look nice, it should look clean. It's hiding in plain sight. I'm not advocating that you go and do this, which was like in the back of my head, maybe like a legal implication, you know, like you do what you do, and KRINK is clean and looks nice. And I honestly, after the first bottles and mops came out, it was there was a lot of positive feedback, and people liked the way it looked. They thought it was interesting, which is very surprising to me. You got to understand that, like, I'm a guy, all graffiti writers in the beginning are told that's garbage, that's worthless, you're not going to do any, you know, what are you doing? This is stupid. And so you're constantly put down at every step of the way for what you do. And that's in the back of your head always. You know, I was in a show, we were in this big group show at a museum, and I was like, and when there was like a group photo, and I was like, every single one of these people has been arrested. 100%. All of us. And I'm like, that's crazy. That's crazy. And people have, you know, people. So anyway, that's always in the back of your head when you're doing stuff. And I know a lot of graffiti writers who are like, and this is years ago now, the climate was so different. Now, if anything, you have like fake graffiti writers. But back then you would struggle with just like, do I use my real name? If I'm doing some art thing, I can't show my face. I can't show that I have any association with this. I have to consider the implications of that. You know, people would catch a case. You'd get your door kicked in, you know, and somebody would seize your shit, and you had to think about that. That was very real. So for me, everything was like, just, I was doing it as it came. And also the phone was ringing, and, you know, I was choosing to pick up the phone, and the feedback was positive. People were cool and people were interested, which was shocking to me because I was so used to people being like, you're a fucking loser. Not that no one ever called me a loser, but, you know, just like that general attitude.
Was there any issue with creating this brand and its association with graph being illegal? And so maybe stores or distributors or whatever that you're dealing with is like, oh, well, we're going to be selling this product that's going to be used to fucking bomb.
Was there any what?
Was there any like issue with that, or has it just been completely chill on that
I don't
end?
say that. I'm not like, yo, we're about to wreck shit, you know, like you need to. It's not like that. Like I'm not a salesperson, and I'm actually really bad at that. And I'm not salesy, and like I feel like, again, sometimes I acquaint certain things with like my graffiti background where I'm like, I do the thing quietly and I put it out there, and then it is received however it's received. And then I keep doing it. Sometimes whether anybody likes it or not, you know, and I'm and like, for whatever reason, I don't know, like there's a bunch of different reasons depending on what it is, but I feel like I create, I make things or do things and put them out in the world, and I don't really sell. I'm really bad. Like I tell people sometimes I have to, when I've had to do in the past, where I'm like, I don't know, dude, like search the internet. If you want to work together, like I'm ready to work. I show up on time, we deliver on time, we do.
Because in the beginning, it was like word of mouth. It was word of mouth and people seeing it in real time and going into a shop and seeing it in real time. And there wasn't this whole like Instagram self-promotion, consistent self-promotion thing that has to go down. Now it's, you're really on, like, we are now all really on that in this world where that's what's going on. but that's not really your thing, the whole like selling yourself kind of thing, even though you have to an extent, being a company in the modern age.
Yeah, I mean, there's sales, and then there's like marketing, and there's so for me, like sales is like somebody's like really pushing you to buy something, and I'm not that guy. But like on the marketing side of just like making something and then putting it out into the world, and people are like curious and interested in that, then that's something that I've done for a while. Even if it was just like you're, as a graffiti writer, you're like Joe Wild style technician, or you're, hitting every mailbox in the city with a tag. Like those are specific choices. And I was a certain type of graffiti writer, and I just like, I kind of do that with the brand, whereas like I just make stuff and put it out there, and it's like it hits or it misses. And I've been very fortunate that that the majority of the time there's really positive feedback, and there's a lot of interest. And like, sure, sometimes we have things that are like, yo, graffiti, but we also try to temper that with other things that are not graffiti, so that we're, like myself, have multiple interests, and in and styles.
Yeah. How did the sprayer, the dauber, and these kinds of tools come about that not many other brands are making? And also the logistics of actually making them, and the quality control that goes behind it, and all of that stuff. I guess from the general idea of it, like the dauber is a really interesting one, because that's some shit where it's like, yeah, you could do graph with it, but it's like, are you really going to? It's probably a different realm that you're going to use that in. Although it has like the black, the ink, the like a lot of elements to it that would be for doing that, but also logistics of actually using it. So how did that come about?
I just feel like for all products, for all Krink products, it's like there's often some relation to something that I've been using in the past. And there's some, yeah, there's just some like I think because I used so many, or like goofed around with so many things, and things were successes and failures in different ways. And so, sure, is it like the dauber, which is like a shoe polish? It's like a cotton ball on the end of a stick, and that's like this shoe polish applicator that used to be used on the inside of trains. And it's a mess, but it's also fun, and it's also interesting. And I think that there's a lot of things that really people don't know about, and it's kind of interesting to bring those out and expose other people, because KRINK has, of course, this graffiti side, but we have a much bigger market. And I think a lot of people are paying attention to KRINK as a brand, that are just graphic designers or young artists, or people who are, or even professional artists, because there's more of a choice to see things today, and buy things on the internet. And so I think artists in general want to experiment, and then they see this and they're like, oh, I'm going to buy this and try this and use it for whatever. And that's completely different than the graffiti scenario. And so I just like, developing those things and bring them out. Now, they don't always do very well. Some do great.
Yeah, that's
some
actually what I was going to ask. How was the reception to the dauber?
I think the dauber is I don't think people know what it is. I think that it does okay. but I think that, so we come out with a product and then we have to like sometimes show how you use it. And then I've always had mixed results with that, as far as there's what I do, there's what you could do, and there's what someone else does. You know, it's so varied that very early on I was kind of like, well, I don't know, figure it out yourself. So I'm a figure it out yourself kind of person. And then I've over time I'm like, oh, I realize like some people want to be told what to do. You take this, you do this, and you do this, and that's how you do it. That's how you do this thing. And that can be really difficult for me. So sometimes I do my thing, but sometimes I have to like work better, do a better job at broadening the scope of like what somebody, like, not everything has to be a drippy tag, not everything has to be a drippy word, but that's what I do, and it's hard for me to, I have to like manage that better. Anyway, the dauber, I think people are interested in it but don't really know what to do with it. We made a limited amount and we might not make any more.
It's hard too because graph is so traditional. The tools used are very traditional, and people are sticking to their select few. You know what I mean? And so there's,
Well, I would disagree with that. I
yeah.
would say, well, I think that there is a traditional base, but then there's all these kids out there that are doing other stuff, that are
I'm just thinking in terms of like,
experimenting.
you're right. I'm thinking in terms of like markers. Like everyone's like Pilot Jumbo, this black mop, and then this silver uni, and that's like almost like a religious thing at this point. And so then you come out and you make something like the dauber, which is like, yeah, they did use it in the insides and stuff like that. However, it is so far removed at that point from what they're doing that it's like the artist will see this and use it, but then the writer might not for, various reasons. And that's something that I think about a lot because like you as a person, I see like super creative, just resourceful, right? But when you're running this thing that is KRINK, you also have to like, it's not just like, let's say you're making a painting for yourself where you can do what you want for you because you like it, and whether people like it or not is very secondary. You know what I mean? And that's something that I struggle with doing this thing that is this radio show and magazine. It's like, do we do what we want because we're going to do what we want, or do we do what we want mixed with a huge backlight of like, are people going to fuck with this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I mean, that's a constant struggle, and I think like I deal with that all the time, and that's essentially the unknown, right? And then there's the whole like, if you build it they will come kind of vibe. And I think that, and then you make something and it's like doesn't do well by whatever metric you're using, or you invested money, you invested time, it doesn't do well, and then you invested time and money, you did something else, you're not sure about it, and it takes off and you're like, oh my God, wow, that was great. And I do think it's important to just trust yourself. Hard, not easy for everyone. Trust yourself, be true to yourself. Like, I think this is interesting. Someone else 100% is going to think it's interesting if you think it's interesting. And you got to be able to get up after failures, because everybody fails. Everybody has a failure, and your genius fucking idea is a total flop, and that's whack, obviously. But like, look, here's an example. So the people who can watch can see this, can see it. So we're making this thing right now, and this is called Thermozine. We called it. We made one a long time ago, and we just brought it back. This is a goofy project. It's fun. And this is a little 6-page or something zine that we made on our thermal printer in the warehouse. And for me, this this speaks to like back in the day when we would have like you'd make a zine or you do something and it was like your boy worked at Kinko's and then you went there and you did whatever project you were doing, whether it was wheat paste or you want to make a zine or you want to make whatever, and you did it essentially for free or you got some deep discount, and then you made the thing and whatever, it went where it was. And so this is UPS labels that we get for free. We have a thermal printer we ship every day. That's all done for free. And we're going to give these free with every order. But then there's another side of it that's like, this is a pain in the ass because the printer is really finicky.
So that's not ink.
It's not ink. This is all thermal.
We use
this
a thermal
printer
too.
Yeah. And so the thermal printer is really finicky and this has a lot of black. And so it overheats. And then we can't have that overheat and be disruptive to the warehouse. And then sometimes it prints things well, and then it prints other images really bad. And so you have to find the images that are going to print. And then, so that's like dictating now, like normally you wouldn't do that. Normally the printer has to figure that out. Like they would be able to do it. And so we started to spend a little bit of time on this. And then I was just like, this has got to stop. I spent all fucking day on a free zine that no one's going to care about, like the nuances of like, oh, the thermal printer and these like geeky design production things. But still, I made it, as something that I thought was fun. And it speaks to like, I've been doing this since before KRINK started, where it's like, oh, I'm going to make my own ink. I'm going to make my own markers. I'm going to make my own thing. And then put it out there, and then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And hopefully people enjoy it and think, oh, that's fun. And maybe other people with thermal printers will come out and drop their thermozine.
So that eventually fades away, correct?
This will, if it's in sunlight, I don't think it'll fade, but the white will discolor.
Okay.
The white will turn off-white.
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's cool. It's fun. I mean, again, this is just like the heritage of like, yo, Angel's working at Kinko's, yo. Like we can, he's got the graveyard shift. We can come through and make something. And like, oh, yo, my boy has like a computer, it's back in the day or something, like, and like you lay something, oh, you could lay something out. Oh, this guy's a photographer. Like, let's make a zine. And then all of a sudden you make from a free zine. Then you get a little budget, you get a little advertisement, and then all of a sudden you're going to print in color, or you get like a little, your boy can't hook up the laser copies, but you get a budget, and then you got a laser copy cover, and then that builds into something. And I feel like that's very much like how KRINK started and how we're still doing the same thing today with just some kooky like thing that we're doing. And then we call them genius ideas. And we'll have these ideas, like, oh, let's do this. And then they'll get shot down or they're just total failures. And there's a broad range of product development or marketing ideas. And it's either we can't afford them, we can't do the minimum, or we can do it. And then we're like, oh, we're scared. When we first came out with Sprayer, we didn't know what was going to happen. And when we first dropped it, it was wildly popular and we sold out in like a week or something crazy. But then from a production side, it took us a long time to then re-up. And so it went away for a while. But it was just like, you never really know. So here's the takeaway. It's very important to do the thing. If you don't do it, no one will know. And like, it's very important to do the thing that you want to do, and don't be scared of failure, and just do it and get it. And then if it doesn't work, you will learn something from that, and then you will move on.
That's why I fuck with KRINK, because there's this stagnancy that can happen and this rigidity that can happen in any person, company, organization, clan, group, individual, whatever. And it's like you can be really, really good at one thing. So since you're really good at that one thing, you just kind of rely upon that one thing. But then years go by and you're sleeping and fools are improving. And before you know it, like your one thing that you're good at is like surrounded by 20 things that new shits that you weren't, you had your eyes closed because you were so nasty at that one thing you're doing. And I see KRINK is, you don't really do that, like you have your staples and your strong points, but you're also always just kind of pushing the limits, pushing the boundaries. And I feel like um there's a risk to that, with what you're doing, there's a risk to that, but you're just taking it anyways, which is really cool. And I respect that. Do you make any separation in your brain in terms of you as the creative designer and like the person who's running at the helm of KRINK, and you as like an artist, someone who's making these paintings and viewing things from that lens? Is there a distinction in your mind uh, between doing that? Like, for example, you're going making the stuff that's here. Is there a distinction between these things in your brain and you as like, I'm the type of person who like I label myself internally, like not even externally. So I'll be like, oh, like I'm a fucking podcaster or whatever. And then I'll be like, no, I'm not a podcaster. I'm like a martial artist. Like, so I should be mainly doing like martial artist things rather than like podcasting host things. So like, damn. And then I'll get mad confused, but really nothing's changed. I'm just an individual. I'll be like, or like before it was like, yeah, so do you do that? Or are you just an artist and these are different aspects of your life?
It's very complicated and very tricky, and I think like there are some. First of all, I think that for all those kids out there that have gone to art school, going to art school, or in any creative world, which I guess like I can speak to more of, but like it's like a lot of times you'll be lucky if you get to stay creative. And like I think that everybody, if you go to art school, everyone wants to be like a rock star. It really is like you want to be whoever is the rock star at that time. There's generational influence, and that's really hard. And then it trickles down to like people have various elements, they go into different things. Like I know I went to art school and the guy's like, a mortgage broker now. You know what I mean? Like he fell into that somehow. And another guy is like a high-end carpenter, or and then some people are like blue chip artists. Or someone's in design, and anyway, it's varied. So it is really difficult, and I think that I never thought I'd be like running a brand or a business, but I also think that some of those things scratch a creative itch, and everything goes up and down, and so I've been fortunate to have that KRINK has had success and that I've had success with art projects. But it is very challenging from a time perspective to separate the two, because there's essentially always a fire to put out. And yeah, and then sometimes with like on the art side, on any side, the more time you put into it, the more you learn from it.
The more you learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the more something will grow. I mean, you could make a mistake. Like during COVID, I had a garden. My garden was booming. Huge tomato, booming, and I cook. I'm into like, that's also another thing that like scratches a creative itch in a different way, and I really enjoy it. And then it's also like sharing, and people enjoy like what you cook. So I'm into that. The garden I was super into. with my kid, you know, and it was booming. Beautiful garden, pat on the back, YouTube, all strictly YouTube, some internet, didn't know anything about it. And then after the you know, we went back to Brooklyn, garden not as booming, you know, and it was just like time and effort and putting and just like caring for it every day and looking at it. And it's like that really makes a huge difference, the time and energy you put into something. And like, you know, there's that versus bills. You know, I got to pay my bills. And it's like, if you were just like, yo, I'm jujitsu dude, I'm just doing jujitsu all the time. Well, if somehow you have to fund that, you know, and everyone has to fund their life somehow. So with KRINK, I was very fortunate early on with like I said, the phone was ringing. People were asking me and I couldn't meet the demand. And so I was like, okay, I can't meet the demand. I'm going to focus a little more on this and try, just because there was a demand. And I just kept focusing on it, and it grew, you know. And like the art stuff, it definitely goes in waves. It's definitely hard.
Are you trying to make more time in your life for making paintings?
Yes. Painting, drawing, but I'm really mixed about like, it's like general creativity. It's such a tough call because it's such a tough call. Like I didn't like to even, I don't even really think of myself as a painter. I just happen to use paint. And like, I'm not a formal painter. And so if I were to get into something else, that's fine too. It doesn't have to be painting. It's like generally staying creative, in the scope of everything that I do. That's kind of the goal.
Yeah. When did you get into making art in this style? I know that it has a lot to do with your background. You can see the style that it's in, done with some sort of thing that someone would use for graffiti, probably, and probably done using the materials that you've made yourself, which is another aspect of it. When did you start doing that? And I saw, like, you know, like some of the earliest videos I've ever seen of you, way before meeting you in person, but just like observing you as a fan of you. You were doing that on the mailboxes in those like New York City videos. People would be tagging, and then you'd be doing it in the mailbox. Pretty much that on the mailboxes. When did you start doing that? And then when did that turn into like some of your styles of paintings?
So I'd say that maybe like the early 2000s. The early 2000s was a shift for me, just away from graffiti in the sense of like, I'm writing my name, you know, and I had already been messing maybe with alternative graffiti styles, like all bucket paint, no spray paint, you know, and just that at the time was like unusual and different. I mean, people had done it for sure, but I think it was, to your point earlier, how graffiti can be strict. It's like, yo, that's not graffiti, you know, and it's like, I don't really care what you say, you know, like you're no. And so, and then I just took away my name and stuck with materials that I was using, which was KRINK at the time.
Which, let me just say, is a pretty crazy thing to do. You take away your name. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing is like your name, and you want to get your name up as much as humanly possible, and you want it in everyone's face, and you want it repeated hundreds and thousands of times around the city. Whereas your approach is, let me take away the name.
Well, I mean, I think also I got a little frustrated with graffiti, and I guess I also came to the conclusion that it really came down to the name was graffiti. Like if you do, if you do like a throw up or a block letter and it says like Jazzy Joe or whatever, and you have your wild style and it has 20 colors, and it's still like aesthetically letters, even if the letters are like, people can't read whoever's, wild style piece or whatever, or a throw up, or it doesn't make sense to them because it says like scrotum and it has like some weird letters or something. You know what I'm saying? Like that, people don't understand, but they read it as graffiti because of the name. And like I got annoyed with people either like, I love graffiti, I love the colors, and it's like they didn't know what graffiti was, or like there was just like this other side of it. So I just wanted to step away from that, and I just kind of deduced that it was really like the name. So I took away the name and just started doing, drips, and that was like a big experimentation, because some of the mailboxes to me was trying to like create a sculpture with paint. So like transforming something with paint, and then now that's considered sculpture. And like to me that was like really interesting as well. That's some like, I don't even know. And then from there scaling up using paint as opposed to KRINK specifically. But that's just what I had been doing. I was using all bucket paint. I was using KRINK. I'm still using the same materials in relatively the same places, but then at the same time, I started to also bring it indoors to canvas, because I was just like not trying to be doing graffiti all the time and out late, and like it just didn't fit my schedule. It was really, really difficult. So and I was changing, I was getting older and I was doing different stuff, and I kind of felt like I had done graffiti. And so coming indoors, and I think, a lot of friends, contemporaries were also kind of like, oh, I did a piece in the tunnel last night, but you know what? I'm trying to chill and I'm trying to do like a painting. And none of us kind of really knew what we were doing in a way. And like bringing it indoors and making these paintings. And almost all of us, I want to say, started out with some kind of like rendition of our names, our graffiti names, and someone else had like an arrow or something in there, and like all of us were just developing, bringing it indoors, and stepping away from spray paint, stepping away from graffiti, which had been vilified. Fast forward to 2024, there's a lot of interest in graffiti. There's a lot of interest in spray paint. Back then, people would look down on you, or you didn't want to do that because you had this history of being looked down on. And so that just led to canvases. And for me, it was like difficult scaling down sometimes. And then that just led to, an exploration of ideas inside in the studio, and just working in like a hard rectangle versus like, a little tiny piece of a wall or a big piece of a wall, or you know what I mean, but something that was so much bigger. The scale of graffiti is a lot bigger than I think graffiti writers realize.